Whoa! Tasty high note. Oh, hi, don't mind me. I'm practicing my new baritone sax. I just heard PayPal's paying for people's stuff every day for 100 days, and there's 10 million up for grabs. All you have to do is use PayPal checkout online. So there's never been a better time to buy a few things off the old wish list. Like this leaf blower! PayPal could pay for your purchase. The Great PayPal Checkout.
No purchase necessary ends July 18th. See official rules at paypal.com/thegreatpaypalcheckout/terms. Participating merchants only must use PayPal checkout online. Coverage of up to $100 and eligible purchases per card.
Culture evolves at the speed of light, just like your financial needs. When it comes to your money, Credit Karma keeps you in the know and ahead of the game. You can count on Credit Karma to keep up with your financial needs as they evolve. We'll help you monitor your progress and give personalized recommendations so you can make strides towards your goals and find your way to money. Make sure you're on the right track, no matter where you are on your financial journey. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on.
Hello and welcome to episode 272 of Something About the Beatles podcast. And if you're listening to this, maybe it means you have slogged through the previous episode on Now and Then. And it's nearly 5 hours of length. And hopefully you enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun to put together. It was a lot of fun to have the conversations I did with my guests, all 21 of them, for that particular topic and show. But one of them we are circling back to. This was a conversation taped a little bit earlier, prior to really getting a read on the size and scope of the Now and Then release. And it is a returning guest, Ray Connolly, who has been on the show, I think now 3 times, maybe 4 prior to this. But he has a new book out, a memoir, post-COVID, which, if you know anything about his story, he was in a coma when he came down with COVID, and he miraculously survived, just celebrated his 83rd birthday, and penned a memoir, Born at the Right Time, which is a terrific read detailing not only, of course, the Beatles, who he was very close with, John in particular, but also Paul, and all the other artists of the 60s that he had a close-up view of while they were doing their art. But beyond that, just not only the other artists that he wrote up and interviewed, but we talk a bit about the screenplay that he wrote for what is commonly regarded as the finest cinematic project of Ringo, That'll Be the Day. That was a screenplay penned by Ray, as well as the follow-up, the sequel, Stardust, which did not feature Ringo. But we talk a bit about that. It's all in his memoir, which is a terrific read, to reiterate. So I do hope you check it out, as well as his other books, the Lennon bio, being John Lennon, as well as the Beatles archive, the Ray Connolly Beatles archive, which is just indispensable as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, I'll be brief about this. It's a busy time of year, and I know some of you might still have not gotten through the previous episode yet, so have at it. But just a word about upcoming shows. I do want to mention another panelist from the Now and Then show, Sibylle Sullivan. Our conversation will be coming up next, and I did misstate her title of her book. So to correct that, it's actually not My Private John Lennon, it's My Private Lennon, Explorations from a Fan Who Never Screamed. So you've got that conversation to look forward to, as well as some stuff that we've got in the can. One that I think may raise a few eyebrows, and I think you know who I'm talking about, the current biographer of George Harrison. We did have a conversation. I thought, you know what, here's an opportunity. Let's see what happens. So you'll get to hear what happens. We've got Olympiad to come. That's been kind of sitting on the back burner for a while, but we'll have that coming up, as well as another conversation that sprang from the show that I did with Aaron on the top, most influential or important Beatle resources. I think you know what I'm speaking of, so that'll be coming up. In fact, I did solicit input from you guys on people who read Beatles Illustrated Record back in the day. So I've heard from a bunch of you people so far. I would like to hear from more, particularly those in Britain who might have read it at the time. It'd be nice to hear from you guys. But you got that to look forward to. And then early next year, we've got a lot of 60th anniversaries coming up, including a very big one in February. So we will attempt to wrap our heads around that and do it justice as the time comes. So definitely a bunch of shows in the works that I'll try to get up as quickly as I can turn them around, and more to come. Oh, And of course, cannot overlook the Mal Evans book, the first volume, which has come out in the past month. I'll be having a conversation with Ken Womack, returning guest to the show, pretty soon. And some other stuff that we've talked about and had in the works for a while that, it's taken some time to get together, but it's coming. So, anyway, hope your 2023 was a good one, and everybody hearing this has a happy 2024 and a wonderful holiday season. I thank you for all being listeners and supporting the show. There will be some changes to the show coming up. Nothing for you guys to worry about, more on the business end of things, but watch for that. Just a new and improved way of doing things. Thanks for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. And here we go with Ray Connolly. There are things in the book, bits and pieces that you've disclosed in other interviews and other conversations we had, but pulling the whole thing together, this ongoing narrative that it's sort of a parallel life to the people that we always enjoyed as artists. You were, as you say, born at the right time, in England, of the generation that was rocked by Elvis and influenced by skiffle to start paying attention to music, and witnessed up close such an accelerated evolution in popular culture, and was even a partaker in it with not just your journalism, but writing screenplays and telling the story of all these people that we cared about. It's just an amazing thing. After all these years, you've managed to pull together the story and having such a rich body of work to draw from. As you point out in the book, you don't have the cassette recordings, but at least you've got the finished pieces.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing thing. You've done a bunch of things with the Beatles, with the Ray Connolly Beatles archive, the Lennon bio, but now you're drawing in all these other people, Dusty Springfield, and talking to Elvis, and then talking to Dylan about talking to Elvis, and all this great stuff is such gold.
That was exciting for me to actually meet Elvis and talk to him. Mm-hmm. And he admitted that, I think the line was, I wouldn't be being honest with you. They didn't say I was ashamed of some of the films I've been in. That's quite a big thing for someone to say.
And to say it within earshot of Colonel Parker.
Well, he was just right over there, and I thought, oh my God. 3 days later, I was in New York. I really wanted to get to Bob Dylan. And I thought, well, I'll ring the manager. The manager said, why don't you come round, Ray? You can talk to me there. And I said, okay, I'll come round. So wherever it was, not very far away. Mm-hmm. And I went in to see him, and I explained what I wanted. Bobby, as he called him, was coming over to do an interview, to do a show, the Isle of Wight Pop Festival, in a few weeks' time. Mm-hmm. And he said, I said, well, when he comes, I'd love to meet him. I'd love to talk to him. Oh, I don't think we can do that, but why don't we speak to him on the phone? Will that be okay on the phone? So, well, yeah. And then suddenly, I've got a phone in my hand, and Bobby is on the line. I didn't expect this, because usually I had time to think about things.
Right.
I've got Bobby on the phone, and I just had to talk, I thought, well, I can tell him I've been to see Elvis. So I said, I've just been to see Elvis. And immediately he became the interviewer, asking me what it was like. And it was just bizarre, really, to tell Bob Dylan about Elvis. A week later, I phoned John Lennon quite a lot. So I saw John a lot. And so that wasn't a big deal. But I had to tell him, I've just been to see Elvis. And really. So both John Lennon and Bob Dylan really wanted to know what he was like. Did I like it? Did he do the Sun stuff? Did he do with Scotty Moore there, with the Jordan Ayres there? All the same questions that you would have asked or I would have asked if they'd phoned me, So that was a kind of great moment. And it sort of brought home to me that the idols you have when you're 15, they don't change. And you still have them when you're 25, 35, 45. The first one for Bob Dylan and for John Lennon was Elvis, and the Scotty Moore guitar licks and all those things. I think I'm probably the only person in the world that can say that, that I spent at Bob Dylan and John Lennon both asked me about Elvis. I remember a little later, I was in New York with John, and he said, I've lost all my Elvis records because I moved house and I got divorced and all these things, and I haven't got any left. I said, well, hang on, let me phone RCA Victor in New York and see what they say. So I got onto RCA, and they said, I think we can fix that, Ray, for you. Yeah, we can fix that for John Lennon, yeah. Not for me, for John Lennon, yeah. And then I forgot all about it. I went off, came back to England and everything. And then someone else, another English writer, said, while he'd been there, John had been going through all his new Elvis records he'd been sent and throwing out all the film ones, all those terrible things. But the great ones, I remember Sean, after his father died, Sean Lennon said, Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel was still on the John Lennon jukebox in the kitchen.
Right.
So he kept that one. So, I mean, I'm sure there were others, but that's kind of nice,
Yeah. That fandom endured.
I've got 1,000 records here, but I only probably play a few, like you. I imagine you have all this stuff and we don't play it.
Yeah, you'd mentioned Joni Mitchell specifically.
Oh, Joni Mitchell, yeah. Yeah, well, I kind of let her down, really. Or she kind of let me down. I thought that she was fantastic. And I still think Both Sides Now is just a brilliant, brilliant song. And I heard the Judy Collins version first, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
When I met her manager, he also managed Neil Young. Anyway, he's dead now. He kept interrupting. And I thought, well, why? I was trying to get Joni to talk about growing up and all these things. And I couldn't get it out of her. And this guy kept saying, that's getting personal now. That's getting personal. It's not personal. I mean, Both Sides Now is a very personal song. So it didn't go that well. And then he left. She said, I think you better leave it alone. I'll be glad and find them. It was never as good as I wanted it to be because I thought I could have got a better interview. And I realized only a few years ago, the manager was afraid I was asking Joni about the illegitimate child that she'd given birth to. I knew nothing about that. Mm-hmm. That wasn't what I was trying to do. I was trying to talk about a girl growing up writing Both Sides Now.
Sure.
And that's what I was really on about. But I think he thought I probably knew something and I was a tough English tabloid journalist going to get stuff out of her that she didn't want to talk about. That was not the case. I just wanted to talk about Joni and how she came to write Both Sides Now and all the other things too.
Right.
So I always felt that if she ever sees this, I'm sorry, Joni, I'm really sorry. That's what I wanted to do, to talk about you growing up, not about anything else that you didn't want to sort of talk about.
And the funny thing is, when you were handed salacious stuff like that, as Dusty Springfield did, you didn't really use it. You didn't run with it.
No, I didn't because, well, Dusty wanted me to, the way she said it was, she said, go on, you've heard the rumors, go on, ask me. And I thought, I think she probably means not being gay, but I wasn't sure. And I thought, well, I don't want to get into this. And also, in those days, you didn't ask people about their sexual preferences or whatever. You just didn't. Everyone loved Dusty because she was on TV all the time and she was this happy-go-lucky girl and everything. And suddenly I'm being presented with it. I thought, well, I don't know what to do about this. So what I did was I let her talk, and it sort of came out in dribs and drabs and everything. But then I had a problem because I took her home that night because she did live very close to where I lived, and dropped her off. And she said, what I just told you could ruin my career, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I thought, no, it's not going to. I'm not going to ruin your career. I'm slightly in love with her too. Dusty she was just fantastic. A beautiful voice, just great voice, When I wrote it, I put sex stuff in the middle of the piece. And the paper was unsure too about running it. Put it in the middle of the piece with a headline, Dusty at 30, which was a nothing headline, really. And she rang the next day. I was away, but she rang and talked to my wife and told her that that was fine. She'd say what she wanted to say, and I got it right. So I'm glad because I could have made a big thing of it, but I didn't. Equally, I could have made a big thing about when the Beatles broke up, when John Lennon told me months earlier. But he said, but don't tell anyone. I mean, as a journalist, you think, oh my God, he gave me the best story of my entire life and I can't use it. But I'd agreed not to. And also, I was with him in Canada and he actually paid, or probably all the Beatles, I don't know, but someone had paid the airfare. First class, my first time flying first class to go to Canada with John Lennon. So I didn't run it and I sat on it for months. And then at the end of the thing, poor Paul, who was also waiting for John to make his mind up. In the end, Paul said, I'm leaving the Beatles too. And put it out as a sort of press statement, which didn't quite say what he said. What he said was very clever. I mean, that's Paul all over though. He said, there are no plans to do this stuff, to do any more Beatles stuff. But he left it open.
Right.
Maybe things could change. And I thought, well, and I got it the day before. I'd read it and thought, well, there was an embargo on it for like 8 o'clock the next morning. I'll wait until the next day and then I'll put it in the paper. And in the meantime, the Daily Mirror saw this and thought, that means he's left the Beatles. So the headline the next day was, Paul McCartney quits the Beatles. And that went around the world. That was a huge story.
Right.
I hadn't run it, and I'd had it for months. So I rang John about lunchtime when I knew he'd be getting up. And I said, have you seen The Mirror? He said, yeah. Why didn't you? I would have told you in Canada. I said, well, you asked me not to. You're the journalist, Connolly, not me. And, you sort of couldn't win with him, but that was John. We didn't fall out over it. I mean, the next day we were best friends again,
Sure.
Not best friends, but we were good friends,
He's absolutely like a through line through your book, from relating how your life sort of paralleled his in terms of the impact your generation felt with skiffle and rock and roll and Elvis.
Yeah.
And there's the bit about if you'd been schoolmates, he would have asked you into the Quarrymen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we were on the back of the limousine, and there was some Native American people still lived in a tiny little reservation in somewhere upstate New York or somewhere like that. And John got it in his head he was going to go there and support. They were in a row with, I think that's right, they were in a row with the New York State authorities about building a road through their reservation, which is fair enough, and John was going to support them. So we were there, and we're going along, we were singing Buddy Holly songs mainly, also Fats Domino, but we argued about that. He was convinced that, there was one song that he was convinced that there was, I forget what the song was now. Yes, me and I'm in love again. It could have been that one. I don't know. Anyway, we're going through all these songs the way you do. And like two fellas, like two 15-year-olds in the back of a car singing our favorite songs from when we were 15, which is what you do. And listening, and John said, well, if you've been in my class at school, I've joined the Beatles. And I said, my mother wouldn't let me join. You couldn't, because she's a straight woman. And he said, I'd have forced you to join, to rebel against your mother. And I thought, you didn't know my mother. I thought about that and thought, yeah, if I joined, I'd have been the first out, because if he got pulled, that'd have been that, Ringo was just a bloody good drummer. John was actually very astute, He knew Paul was fantastic and George was good too, but they needed a good drummer. And, poor Pete Best, he just wasn't good enough. They knew it. I mean, they were really hot musicians, these guys. But by this time in Hamburg, they were good. And they'd played with Ringo before, and they got on with him. Pete is a nice guy. I've interviewed him too, and he played rugby, which is a kind of middle-class sport. And the Beatles weren't even interested in football, but, rugby was quite right. So that's odd to be interested in. It really was an odd thing. It's sort of like working class boys in bands didn't play rugby. That was quite rare, Anyway, and he did, and he was a nice guy. But I think it was purely they wanted the best drummer because they knew how good they were. That's the other thing. I think when people know how good they are, that makes a hell of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't know. They just don't know. But I think John knew how good Paul was. And Paul is extraordinarily talented, something like that.
Mm-hmm. You, of course, wrote the screenplay to That'll Be the Day, which was basically sort of inspired by the Harry Nilsson song 1941, talking about his abandonment. You want to talk about that a bit, how that story took off and how it sort of took form over time? It wasn't like all one big burst of inspiration, but it evolved.
It evolved. It was, basically, I went to borrow a book, the Jerry Hopkins book on Elvis, of David Putnam, who was a friend who I'd met through Mike McCartney, who was Paul's brother. And we just got on. And he was a new young producer, and he, I think, made one film, maybe two by then. Anyway, they hadn't done that well, but we got talking, and we were exactly the same age. I born December 40, he's born like April or March 41, John Lennon was born like October 1940. So all these things I learned. And while we're there, David Putnam said to me, why don't you write a film for me? And I just read a novel, and I think the novel had actually been optioned by a film company, but I didn't think about writing film. I'd never done it. I'd written a lot of film reviews at university and things like that, and a bit as a journalist. So I said, I don't know how. She said, I'll show you. It's easy. It's easy, yeah. And anyway, and then he said, I've got this idea. That Harry Nilsson song, 1941, Happy Father Had a Son. Yeah, I know that one. And he said, maybe in the song, he runs off to join the circus. Maybe Amber runs off to join the fair. And I thought, yeah, I get it. I see this. And then we began planning it. And it was really a mixture of my time in the sixth form, and I did history, In England, time you're 17, you're doing serious study and the English history, as I was saying, yeah. But so our boy was going to go to university to do history and all those sort of things. And so that's how that turned out. But we couldn't get the money. I wrote the film script, and the guy in it was played by David Essex. He doesn't do one decent thing in the entire film because he's totally selfish, which is how I think teenagers probably are. Pretty selfish people. You get over it, but that's and so we couldn't get the money for the film. And then David, his lawyer in New York, said, I think a company called Ronco will back your film if you put so many songs into it. So David Putnam said, can you do that? I said, anything you want, you know. So we got our records out and went through. It's great together. We went through our records, David and me, said, well, like that one, like that one, like that one. Oh, no, don't that. Yeah, this sort of thing, you know, we decided. And we chose, I think, 40 odd tracks. And I weaved them into the script in different places. I said, we can do one here, we can do one on the roller skating ring, about 5 on the fair, you know, and that's how it worked out. And then when we'd done that, it changed the film, because then it became more and more about a boy obsessed with music in the background. But David Essex didn't sing at all in the entire film. David didn't sing. That was the important point, because we didn't know he could sing really, not that well anyway. And so we did it. And when the film was released in England, wherever it played, there were commercials on television for the film showing the sounds of the records and showing bits of the film. So, you know, they had commercials for the album, but showing the film. Fantastic, because it actually meant that, oh, I want to see that one, you know. And people, it was a huge hit, which we didn't expect. We were totally surprised. And when I look at it now, it's an odd film. The guy writes poetry. You know, the David Essex character, the lead character, writes poetry. And he drops out and he does very selfish things. And he leaves his girl, he leaves his wife, he's got a little baby, and he leaves his mother and all these things. He's a real bastard. But it struck a nerve. And the music was just perfect.
The one thing that was not in your control was the timing. And you're talking roughly 1973, 72, 73 when this is in development.
Yeah.
And there's this big, round, world wave of nostalgia. What also put American Graffiti on the map in America, although your film came a little bit ahead of that. And Happy Days, the TV show.
And also, we hadn't seen it until our film came out. We hadn't even seen that one. We said, oh, we've done it too. But there you go.
Right. So you sort of rode this wave. And Ringo, I would argue, rode the same wave when he put out the Ringo album and has You're 16 on it, and Photograph, which is very Phil Spector. It's all sort of part of that same nostalgic era that was going on at that point in the 70s. So it's like the timing couldn't have been more perfect.
No.
And what you're describing here is where you're creating this double album soundtrack of all this great 50s music, and that's what finances the film. People who never even saw the film would have bought that album just because the music was so good. But one thing sort of promoted the other.
At a time, I think every home you ever went into had that album. It was one of those things that everyone you knew had it. And that was pure luck. We had no idea that was going to happen. Except David Putnam and me were both in our early 30s. Mm-hmm. We're probably looking fondly back at when we were 16, 15, 17, you know, that sort of age, which you tend to do. And also, the thing was, we wanted it to be about a fairground because you could hear the records so well on a fairground because they were really loud, and the electric crackle of the bumper cars, you know, and it was really exciting.
Or is there anything to do here in the evenings?
Well, it's darn good life, and it's kind of funny how the Lord made the bee, and the bee made the honey, and the honey bee loved. Oh, and they called it a honeycomb, and they roamed the world, and they gathered all of the honeycomb, in the one sweet fall, and the honeycomb from a million trips made my baby's lips so honeycomb.
And that's what led to bringing Ringo in, because somebody knew that he did Butlins during his stint with Rory Storm.
Yeah, what happened was we were talking about maybe giving Ringo a small part in the film. And David Putnam said, let's go talk to him. So I knew him. And so I rang Apple and had a lunch meeting. We just had a sort of, had sandwiches in Apple. Ringo and Derek Taylor and Neil Aspinall and David Putnam and me. And I think Neil had also been to Butlins. Neil was the road manager of the Beatles, and then he became the managing director of Apple. And so they kept us laughing. Ringo and Neil kept us laughing the whole time. And it kind of made the film seem real. We didn't know it was going to happen at that point. And then on the way out, there's a big door at Apple, a solid 18th century door. And as we're going out, I said, maybe we should offer Ringo the part. And David Putnam and I just stopped there and said, do you think he'd do it? Or could do it? And I said, I don't know. What do you think? So we both hummed and hawed a bit. Anyway, the next time, David rang me and said, Ringo grabbed it. He just grabbed it. He wanted that part. So we got him, and he was fantastic.
This is Radio Sunshine, just reminding all you super, suntan, sunny people that the first inning for dinner is now being served in the yellow canteen.
A couple of the lads from the kitchens got caught climbing over the fence from Camp B last night.
Oh, time with the trifles.
Should see them. These two chicks from Bristol or somewhere. Right slags. And they didn't even get a sniff.
Do you know him?
Yeah, like I said, useless. I wouldn't even touch him with yours.
The best thing he ever did on film by miles. If I'd been him, I would have pursued more movies because he was good at it. He could just do it. You know, they can't all do it. He could do it.
Yeah, you talk about, basically you approached him to be a consultant to speak about Butlins with Neil, and ends up leading to this film role, which then, because he's so good, you expand the role.
Yeah.
And you talk a bit that he actually had his own clothes to wear.
But that was his idea. He turned up when they began shooting. The great thing to me, I wasn't there the first day. I was back in London, and they were in the Isle of Wight or somewhere, which is like 100 miles away. And I got the rushes the next day with Sandy Lieberson, who's the co-producer. And suddenly I'm watching David Essex and Ringo saying my lines. To hear that for the first time, if you're a writer, it's a sort of uncanny experience because it looked right and it sounded right, the way you wanted it to be, which is extraordinary and exciting. Apparently, Ringo turned up on the set on the first day in a Teddy Boy suit he'd had specially made for the Magical Mystery Tour launch. They had a launch party, and that's how he dressed for it. And he turned up wearing his entire outfit, which was funny because, I mean, it was a slightly over-the-top outfit, but it didn't matter. I mean, it's slightly pantomime outfit, really. I'm sure people did dress like that, but not quite as, anyway. Mm-hmm. It was good. But he was just great. I mean, he really was good. We were so lucky.
As the supporting role alongside David Essex, who you describe playing just Jim McClane, bastard character, selfish, thoroughly unlikable, but you needed somebody likable, yeah. And then somebody spots him on stage in Godspell, like, that's our guy.
Yeah.
But you must not be called teacher, for you have one teacher, the Messiah. And you must call no man on earth father, for you have one father, and you are all brothers. And you must call no man on earth rabbi, for you have one rabbi, and he is in heaven. Alas, alas for you, lawyers and Pharisees, hypocrites that you be. Searching for souls and fools to forsake them. You travel the land, you scour the sea. And then when you got your converts, you make them twice as fit for hell as you are yourself.
The great thing about David Essex was he looked great. Mm-hmm. The reason he was there, when David Putnam saw him in Godspell, I said, I think we found our boy. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, when you see him, he's so good looking, just forgive him anything. He just looks great. And he did. He had a very innocent face. Although the character is far from innocent later on, he came across that way. And then we had Ringo playing the character of someone who was very worldly wise. And he was worldly wise. And so we had the young, innocent David Essex at first, later on, not so innocent. And then we have Ringo, who's a bit around a bit, he knows the things. And in a way, then Ringo gets beaten up because he doesn't follow his own advice. He always says, don't do this, don't do that, but he doesn't. And he gets beaten up. And he was out of the film, basically. And we thought, oh, that's a shame. So we thought, let's add another scene. So I wrote a scene where they're playing snooker or billiards, whatever it was, yeah, in a billiard hall, just to give Ringo more space.
Tough.
Sudden cue.
Didn't they teach you anything in that orphanage?
Yeah, they taught me how to look after myself. Makes you tough, though. Independent. When I was 14, my mother came to see me. I told her to piss off.
Here, hold on. You told me your mum was killed in the war.
Did I? Well, I lie a lot.
We had one more day with him on the contract, one more day. And can we get it finished by the end of the day? And that wasn't sure. And Ringo was going to go back to London. He had a big meeting the next day with Apple, and we had to get it finished. And we just did. And I came back in the car with him. He gave me a lift back to London. And I just thought I wouldn't have walked out on the film if I had one more day to do. But Ringo was prepared to do that. But then again, he's had bigger things in his life than I'd had. This, to me, that film was the biggest thing in my life ever. It changed my life.
Sure.
It wouldn't have changed Ringo's life at all if he hadn't finished the thing.
Well, he's right on the cusp of the Ringo album, which launches him huge as a recording artist.
Yeah, well, there you go.
But then, because the film was so unbelievably successful, beyond everybody's expectations, naturally, I think you'd said in the book that David Putnam already was sort of having a sequel in mind, which becomes Stardust.
Yeah.
And how you dearly would have loved to have gotten Ringo into that film, but it didn't work out.
We wanted Ringo, and I wrote it thinking Ringo was going to play the part. What happened, we were driving to a screening in Park Lane in London, and David Putnam said, we've got to make another film, because when they see this, they're going to be demanding a sequel. And I thought, I don't think so. But he was right that they were. And so I said, well, he said, can you do it? I said, yeah, I'll do it, sure. So I went to Italy on holiday with David Putnam and his wife and children, and we sort of planned Stardust. And I was sure we'd get Ringo. And then I was quite sad when we were told, no, he's not going to do it. And I said, why? And well, David Putnam said, all I think is it's too close to the Beatles for him.
So for people who haven't seen the film, the first film, That'll Be the Day, takes this kid on his journey, leaving school and becomes this aspiring rock and roll artist. Stardust is when he actually actualizes that dream, becomes the rock star. And so David Putnam's thinking that Ringo thought that would be too much, too on point, reliving the Beatles experience, and Ringo just wasn't ready to do that.
Yeah, which is a shame. But we got Adam Faith, who was an English pop singer. Not a very good voice, but he was great looking. And, he was very good.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think that, it could have changed Ringo's career too, because he did some really crummy films later on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It could have given him some credibility.
I mean, really terrible films. That happens, doesn't it?
Son of Dracula?
Yeah. They were really terrible films. I mean, it's that thing about they always need a good part, what it is, and they need a good story. And that it was a good story, actually, which we didn't realize at the time. Looking back, I think that was a pretty good piece of work. But we didn't realize it. You just don't. All you're doing is hope this gets made, hope you get it right, all this thing.
It takes on a life of its own.
Yes, it does. And it got more and more rock and roll as we went on. To find places for all the records,
Right.
We had to find a bit for them because they paid for the film. So it was kind of back to front.
Mm-hmm.
What's the one with the Simon Garfunkel, the big one, Mrs. Robinson.
Oh, yeah, Graduate.
The Graduate, yeah. Well, that's a great film. But without Simon Garfunkel, it would have been a less great film. And that music as a soundtrack was incredible. And actually, that was interesting because that was the first time I'd ever seen popular music hits used as a soundtrack for a film. You'd had rock and roll films, but they were being used instead of an orchestra and choir and things. You had songs we all knew. It was perfect. I mean, absolutely perfect.
Enhancing the mood rather than just being wallpaper.
Yeah.
It's so spot on. It's just unbelievable the job that Mike Nichols did
it. Yeah. I mean, it was, wasn't it? I mean, it's a great film. But actually, it fades away. It fades away later on when you've got a great end shot. How they run away from the wedding, they're being driven away. And she looks at him and he's just looking ahead and you think, are these two going to continue? Will it continue as a relationship? And you think, well, maybe not, but it's a great film. As a writer, you think, I wish I'd written that.
In That'll Be the Day, as a sort of stand-in for Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, can you speak to how that particular group of musicians was put together, the casting?
Not really, because that was Neil Aspinall, who was the Beatles road manager and the Beatles now managing director,
Right.
he put the band together. He got Keith Moon, we had, and Billy Fury, who was a very big pop star, English pop star.
Out of Liverpool.
Out of Liverpool, too. So he knew him from way back. And the interesting thing about that was Billy would not sing live with the band. So when they recorded the tracks, he said, I'll let them put the tracks down first. I don't want to sing with them. And I just think he was overawed by sort of hot young musicians. He was probably about 32, but these guys were all 25. And they had huge success. And I just think that Billy was unnerved by them. And he was a lovely guy, but shy, which, as a rock star, is a handicap. But he had a good voice too, and was great looking. I'll never forget that moment. He said, no, I think I'll do it by myself, actually, if you don't mind. These things happen. I bet Keith probably said, let's do one of ours, and that happened that way. But he wouldn't have been there at the recording. He'd have done it afterwards.
Sure.
There's no way.
You talk in the book a bit about Mel Evans, speaking of Neil and the Beatles' inner circle.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about Mel Evans. You, of course, were aware of him just from being in proximity to the Beatles, but you do write about him sort of post-Beatles and this spiral he found himself in that you must have witnessed for yourself.
Mel Evans was a terrific guy. He was a very, very good man and very kind man. And the way he started was, he was a big Elvis fan. I mean, a really big Elvis fan. And he worked for the post office in Liverpool, and he and his girlfriend would have their sandwiches by the pier head, which is not far from the cavern. And one day, they weren't married, and they'd meet for at lunchtime. And one day, he took a different way back to his office, where he worked. And it went down a back street, Matthew Street. And he heard this sound, to him, sounded like Elvis, electric guitar. So he just wandered in and thought, oh, what's going on here? He was huge. He was a big guy, really big, strong guy, big horn-rimmed glasses. And he hung around and he went back. He liked the sound. He went back the next day and the next day. And eventually George Harrison said, why don't you come and work for us? We're going places. We need a bouncer, basically, a road manager, whatever. So he gave up his job eventually and went with the Beatles. Then for the next 18 months or so, he was there all the time. And as they played little gigs, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And he wasn't paid very much. And Brian Epstein demanded that he wore a suit, which is bizarre that someone with a pop band would wear. But the boys were wearing suits by this time. The Beatles wore suits.
That Brian didn't pay for Mel. Mel was left to buy it on his own.
He bought the money, and he couldn't afford. Anyway, he drove the van and all these things. But he was always there, and he was always a welcome face. Whenever you met him, and I met him a lot at Apple, he always be, hello. When I've been to see Elvis, you know, exactly, it's the same thing. What do you play? What do you sing? All the same questions. Anyway, so it was nice. But he was at every session, at every gig, at every session, he was always there. And little by little, he got paid more, but not a lot. Then Beatles broke up, and he was at a loss. He'd been very close to great talent and great fame, and he wanted to be part of that himself. I think we'd all want that. He thought, I can do this. And he did manage Badfinger for a bit, but he didn't get a slice of the big hits. Harry Nilsson sang that song, Without You.
Without You,
He didn't get a slice of that. And so
Mel got the production credit for No Matter What, which was a huge hit. And you would look at it from a distance and think, that should have put you on the map. What happened?
I don't know. What happened? I don't know. Eventually, he decided he would leave the Beatles, make a big break, and go to America and start again in California. And he went to California, and it didn't happen, And I know that John was asking him to, when Yoko said to John, why don't you go off for a bit and be yourself, and, grow up, basically. And he went off with May Pang. He could have gone with Mal, but he thought May Pang was a nice young girl. So he went with May Pang and Mal. Then I remember, never forget, I got a phone call. I spoke to Mal's wife about this, widow, later on. But what happened was Mal was in Los Angeles and he was probably stoned, something. She said he'd taken Valium. He probably stoned too, but he had an air pistol, that you shoot at things with, shooting at lizards in the canyon wall behind him through the window, probably missing. But and then his girlfriend called the cops, and they came, and he turned with a gun, and then they see a gun, and they shoot him, which happens. the gun was not loaded. They didn't know that, though. I don't know what happened to the girl at all. Never heard. But I talked to the wife about it. And she said that she got the phone call, Paul Mal had gone. And apparently he'd rung, I think, New Year's Eve or something like that, just a few weeks earlier, and said to his wife, if I came back now, would you have me back? And she said, I was dying to say yes, of course, immediately. I was playing hard to get. And I said, well, ask me in a few weeks' time. There weren't going to be a few weeks' time. And so a terrible, sad story of someone who got too close to the flame and got burned by it. I think something like that is the best way of saying it. But Mal was a great guy. I mean, he really was. You'd have loved him. Everyone liked Mal. Yeah, John Lennon said a lot of unkind things about all kinds of people, but never about Mal. He'd always say, I don't mean Mal. He'd go on about Alan Klein, go on about Paul, he'd go on about George, he'd go on about, maybe not Ringo, but certainly he had a sharp tongue, but he'd always say, I don't mean Mal though, because he was a nice guy. No.
Did you get any sense at the time around the ex-Beatles, and I know you weren't particularly close to George, but certainly you were communicating with John off and on, and you'd see Paul from time to time, how they reacted to Mal's death?
Paul, yes. They were incredibly shocked, but I don't think we ever discussed it because I wasn't seeing them as much then. No. They had to have felt some guilt. You had to feel some guilt. It wasn't your fault. You did nothing. But at the same time, if Mal hadn't got so close to fame and the flame, that wouldn't have happened, would it?
Or he might not have been in that spiral of feeling unsuccessful.
Well, that's the awful thing about it. He thought, I could do this. I'm sure I can do this.
Yeah.
Maybe he could have done. But we'll never know.
Right.
But what we do know is he was a great guy.
Were you around John much during the period when he was with May?
No, but Yoko told me about that. I rang, or maybe she rang me, I don't know when it was. Anyway, I was on the phone and she said, you never guess where John is now. And I said, well, where is he? She said, he's in Los Angeles. They hadn't been apart ever before. And then he said, yeah. So, really? Yeah. What's he doing there? She said, no, guess. Who's he with? I said, okay, who's he with? Thinking it'd be Mal or someone. And it was May. I said, May Pang, yeah. I thought, well, a very attractive girl. But you sort of think these things. Yeah. And she's nice. She's a very nice girl. And so that was a big surprise. Then a few months later, I was in Los Angeles and I ran into May outside the whiskey. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah. I'd known her from meeting her in London and at Apple and John's house. So we knew each other. And she said, why don't you come round to the house tomorrow? They had a house in Santa Monica. And I went there. And while I was there, John phoned. And she said, oh, do you want to talk to Ray? He's here. And he said, no. Oh, it was very But it was quite interesting how she took me around the house and she said, I want to show you the bedroom, because this is apparently where Bobby Kennedy had sex with Marilyn Monroe. And I said, oh, right. Here, in this room? She said, yeah. I said, oh, okay. Were you there? It's like that Marlon Brando line. Was you there?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe did, maybe. I have no idea. But it just made me laugh that she sort of said. And I thought, well, it's possible. But
now, you haven't seen the May documentary film yet, right?
No, I've not seen that. No. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it twice, and it's wonderful. I think you're really going to enjoy it. It's a beautifully put together film.
I'd like to see it because, May's a really nice person. He chose the right one. Mm-hmm. I always felt sorry for May in a way because, all that feminist stuff that John and Yoko got on about, well, they didn't treat May very well. Really, at the end of the day, that wasn't a great feminism, was it, really?
Right. Where do you begin?
She served her purpose, and I kind of thought, well, she was nice. I really liked her.
In a work situation, usually it's the employer that gives the benefits.
What's interesting is that May telling us that John would phone her, and it didn't end when he went back. There are two versions. There's the Philip Norman version, which is just not true, that after the concert in New York, John went straight back to, that's not true. That's Yoko's version, yeah? The real version is that John was backwards and forwards a bit. And right to the end, he was still ringing May up and going round now and again. It's understandable,
Sure.
But we weren't there again.
Right.
We've got two versions of what happened. And my sympathies probably are that Mays is probably more accurate, although not as romantic in Gilco's terms.
Right. Elizabeth and Robert Brown.
Get into all that, yeah.
Yeah. So what was interesting, pretty early on in the book, you talk about your childhood and your growing up without your father, who was a casualty.
Yeah, they were towing big landing craft. They were towing a lot of them. They're already planning. There's October. D-Day was June the 6th. It was after, and they're going to tow these things right round to the Far East. So there was no danger. It wasn't as though they were worried about anything, just a big storm. And the storm blew up and it was sunk and all hands were lost. And he was just sitting there. He wasn't even sailing it. He was just a passenger,
right,
because his job would come when they got to the Far East. He'd spent most of the war, or the last 2 years, 18 months, in Asbury Park, New Jersey.
Right.
Probably teaching the young Americans how to use European weapons and things. I don't know what they were doing, but that was his job with the Royal Navy. Then he came home. Now you're going to go to the Far East. Okay, fine, whatever.
It was very striking in your book how you describe when people were talking about your father, how steeped in music he was. You know, played piano, knew every song written, basically.
I didn't know this, you know. I mean, I knew he played the piano and he played by ear. But it wasn't until I met a colleague of his who'd been in the war with him who got in touch with me because he saw a piece I'd written in the Daily Mail or something. And he saw my father's picture. That was interesting. He saw the picture. And so he asked me to go and see him. I went to see him. And he said, you know, your dad was amazing. He knew every single song. We'd go into this place on a Friday night when we got paid. And he'd go through the music one after the other on the piano and get the guy to play whatever he wanted. He just knew everything. I don't know whether that's inherited, maybe, or is it possible? Is it possible you can inherit an interest in popular music? I don't know. You'll know.
Your own kids must think you know every song that came out after 1950.
Yeah, but they think that. Yeah, they think that. And they probably think, God, Dad, get a life. But I don't know. But they'd also point out that you don't know every song that came out after 1980 when you stop listening. And you're probably saying,
drop off. Yeah.
For some people, probably like you and me, our teenage years never leave us musically. It's always there in the back of our minds. Yeah.
Sure.
And I'm sure my dad was the same. But also, there were some fantastic songs in the 30s, weren't there, really? There were some beautiful songs. And I've got a Pat Boone album, which nobody else probably has. It's called Stardust. And he sings straight after sort of I'll Be Home and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And he sings a lot of standards from the 30s. It's beautifully produced, that record. Great voice. And I'll Be Seeing You. That's a great song, that is. I'll Be Seeing You in all the old familiar places. What wonderful lines they were.
Right.
And I play that quite a lot.
Reading about your father in the book reminded me of Paul's father of that era and being the band leader and all that.
Yeah.
You actually got to know James McCartney a bit.
Paul's dad was a really nice guy, very nervous when I first began being a journalist. And the very first interview I did, or maybe the second, I think the second actually, was with Mike McCartney, who at the time was in a little group, a satirical poetic group called The Scaffold. Mm-hmm. Poet Roger McGuff and a guy called John Gorman, and who was funny. And I went to the house to meet Mike, and Mike was still in bed up late the night before. But Jim McCartney's dad was there, and he had Paul had bought a very nice house for them over the Mersey in a place called Heswall. And it's quite a posh area, really, quite nice. And a nice big house. And Mr. McCartney was incredibly nice to me. And I stammered extremely badly. And he picked up on this. And he was just incredibly patient and nice. And we just got on. And then I went upstairs and spent a couple of hours with Mike. But also, Mr. McCartney and his second wife, they'd come and see us in London. We lived in Kensington, and they would come down and see us, or they'd be down staying with Paul. Then they'd go out to do something, and Paul at our house on the way back. And Mr. McCartney would always give half a crown, which is like about 20, I don't know what it is now anyway. It's not a lot. But then, probably the same in America, where you give the children half $1 or something, you know, and you would. And he always did, and he would be always searching in his pockets, kind of, before he went. He had to give some money to the children. And But then the breakthrough came really when Magical Mystery Tour went out on television, and it was criticized very heavily by the press. I didn't like it either, but I had to write a piece about it. I was on the Evening Standard, and I've been there about 6 months, and I'm still very nervous. Phone Paul and ask him what he thinks, which was quite a good thing to have Paul's phone number, but I got it from a PR. So Paul didn't give it to me. So I rang Paul, and his dad answered. "Hello, son, how are you?" I said, "Oh, yeah. Look, Mr. McCartney, is your Paul in?" So he was like that sort of thing. He said, "Oh, he's still asleep, son." I said, "Oh, well." He said, "I tell you what, call back in a bit." So I called back in about half an hour. I was on an evening paper, and you can't wait all day. So I phoned, I think, 3 times. On the 3rd time, Mr. McCartney said, "Son, God loves a trier. I'm going to wake him up for you." So he went upstairs and woke Paul up and gave him the papers, which were not good, and said, "Now, talk to this Ray Connolly." And he did. And nice man, you see, nice man. Yeah, I've stayed in touch with his second wife. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a good example for young journalists to always be nice to people, because they'll be nice back, and nice people are nice back. Some people are real bastards, but he was a lovely man.
Absolutely. It was interesting. I did not know the connection between you're getting the gig at the Evening Standard and Maureen Cleave, that you basically sort of took her position when she moved on.
I was just lucky again. It was when I was at university, I went to the London School of Economics and did social anthropology. And another girl there called Rosemary Whitman, and she got a job at the Evening Standard. I got a job on the Liverpool Daily Post. And then she was leaving, she was getting married, and she rang me and said, "I've been told to ask, is anybody could do my job?" And she was doing education. And I would have done that, but I couldn't go because I signed a contract to stay for another year. So she said, "Well, why don't you write to Charles Winter, who's the editor, and tell him that you'd be interested if you're available, but you're not." So I did. And then wrote on a year. I wrote to Charles Winter, and Maureen Cleave had just left, got married, and gone to live in Peru or somewhere like that, somewhere a long way away. And while I went down for the interview, and at the interview, I met Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber, who'd written a song, and they were waiting to see the editor. So was I. It was a bit bizarre, really. And Tim Rice is still a good friend. So there you go. So, and they asked me, what was I interested in? I was embarrassed, really. I said, well, actually, popular music, rock, actually. So I got the job. And I'd written some interviews. I'd written about Mike McCartney, Roger McGough. I'd written about, long interviews, because in those days you could quite long, 2,000 word interviews. Mm-hmm. So that probably helped. And I got this job. Maureen had gone off to Peru, and I just got her job. Maureen was a brilliant interviewer, brilliant writer. She wasn't great on popular music. She didn't actually like it that much, but she could ask great questions. You know about this. The thing about being an interviewer is what's important are the silences when you leave the person to go on and go on. If there's a hole, the interviewee will fill the hole. Yeah, as you know. Yeah.
Yeah, you said that in your book. Who was it you said that tipped you off to that?
It was Marcia Hunt, actually, who was in hair. Marcia, beautiful girl, all this hair there. And we're still friends. She said, because you stammered so badly, I felt I had to fill in because, and so I said, yeah, really? Oh, yeah. Anyway, and she still says it. She said, I'm sure that's what it was. I like to think that I was probably a bit better than that, but maybe I wasn't. Maybe she was right. But anyway, she's a lovely girl. Lovely woman now. She's about 75 now, I suppose. If I'm 82, she must be, getting on that way.
It's amazing because until you wrote about it in your book, I had no idea you had a stammer. We've talked now. This is our 4th time. I had no idea. I feel like I have more of a stammer than you do.
Well, I'm putting on a performance for you now. This is the performance. It is. When I go downstairs to plumb my wife, I'll stammer. When I'm with the children, I stammer. When I'm on TV, I can be great. You can say whatever you want. But I'll walk off and I can't tell the taxi driver where I want to go. But you hear about actors who stammer off stage, get on stage and they're perfect. Well, I'm a bit like that. But it took a while for me to realize how to do it.
Did you know that about Rory Storm?
I never met Rory, but Paul McCartney told me, Ringo told me, John Lennon told me, in the book, there's a line about John wrote to me and said, "Dear Ray, glad you learned to talk proper. It could hinder your career." So Rory, yeah, but then again, Rory didn't stammer when he sang, you know.
Right. So you wouldn't know.
And I never did either. But this ambassador for teacher who wouldn't have me in the school choir because I'd be too jerky. What are you talking about? I've got a beautiful voice. I should be in the choir. I should be the lead singer. And I could have been in the chorium, for God's sake, you didn't know that.
So you mentioned in the book, obviously you were very close with John, you were close with Paul, you were close with the McCartney family, you were close with Ringo, but George was the one you didn't really connect too well with. And you describe in the book, after All Things Must Pass came out, you're trying to get an interview with him, but you'd already reviewed the album and pointed out, he's so fine, my sweet Lord.
It was, wasn't it? It was. I mean, it's a straight lift.
Yeah, and you think that might have soured him on having anything to do with you going forward?
I think he was soured anyway because, you know, he was heavily into all things Indian and mysticism. And I remember going to Apple one day and he was doing an interview. I think it was a sort of general interview, which I didn't do anyway. I never did. I'd never sit in with other people. I wanted them by myself. And usually I could have 2 or 3 hours. You couldn't do it anymore. In those days, the newspaper was a way to get their message out. And so it was banging on about mysticism. You know, you're better than this. You shouldn't be doing this. So he was talking to these other guys and I just wandered off. And I could see him watching me wander off. And then I went back and he was still doing it. So I didn't write a word. And I'm sure he thought, the bastard wouldn't even listen to me. Wouldn't have got a piece of that into the Evening Standard because they'd have thought, oh, you know, come on, no one's going to read this apart from mad hippies who are going to go to Marrakesh or something. The average reader on the way home is not going to read about mysticism or Indian. And it's true. And I still think that. I still think that he got kind of, I mean, John Lennon did for a bit, but with John, you'd have a craze. You have lots of crazes. And then forget about it and do something else. It was Power for the People next week. There'd be something else after that. And it'd be feminism. There'd be something else the next week, which is fine. You understand that. But George got stuck on there was a story that one of his wives, his first wife, I know he had 2 wives. The first wife said that he wouldn't let her cut the flowers in the garden because it was killing God's flowers or something, which is kind of weird, you know, really. They grow again, you know. They're not dead forever. They put out more seeds and grow again. So I was always a bit sorry about that. He was always nice to me. I mean, always perfectly polite. But there was another time too when Paul was marrying Linda Eastman and I was at Apple one day and it was a secret. And I said to Paul into a side room at Apple, I said, the word is you're going to marry Linda tomorrow. He said, yeah. Okay, I'll tell you, yeah. And then George looked in and there's terrible silence as though we had a secret thing going on. And George said, oh man, went off again. And I'm sure he thought, and he was right to think, I'm sure he thought that I thought John and Paul were the real Beatles.
Yeah.
And he was less of one. And he was a second-class Beatle.
Right. He didn't need your help to feel that way.
No, I'm sure he felt that way. And it wouldn't have helped. It's a shame because I think we'd have got on very well. And I know that Michael Palin got on very well with him. You know, a lot of people said he was a great guy not to know. I never got to know him that well. And I'm sure he always thought he's too close to John, particularly close to John and Paul, and I'm not important enough. And he was, you know, it's a shame, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's a shame.
I wonder if John felt that way about George Martin toward Paul, that those two were so close.
I'm sure he did. John held grudges. It could be difficult. I know George Martin told me he thought that Paul was a genius. I think he's a brilliant musician and a brilliant songwriter, although we have to say that Paul's not had a hit in a long time. And I think Paul would give anything to write a hit again, don't you?
Oh, sure. Well, he had a #1 album not that long ago, which is a pretty amazing thing. It was like 40 years since Tug of War, and he did it again with Egypt Station.
Yeah, it is. But, you know, can you sing any of the songs on it? I can't.
Well, there's that.
And I think that he certainly went out and sold it like mad. I mean,
yeah,
I know people aren't listening the same as they were to Paul McCartney, and that's important too.
Have you seen a Paul McCartney concert in recent years?
Recent years.
Like last 20, let's say in this century.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I've seen him in Spain, and I've seen him in Vegas, and seen him in, yeah. And he's brilliant. He's fantastic. But it's a bit like a Beatles tribute, isn't it? I mean, I think Paul Simon said the other day somewhere, he didn't want to sing all the old hits because it's like a Paul Simon tribute concert.
Right.
Paul does that a bit. And, but, you know, Paul has written so many fantastic songs. He's brilliant. Well, I kind of use the word genius more sparingly, but I know George Martin was deeply impressed by him. Whenever Paul rang up, George would run to the phone. You know, it was that sort of thing. I mean, Paul's on the phone. I mean, that's it.
Did you get the sense that George Martin had the same esteem for John?
Actually, he did. I'm thinking now, yeah. I tell you, a slight row in the Martin family. We'd been to a pub one lunchtime in his place in where he lived in near Swindon it was, and his wife and me, and George, we were walking back, and I was talking about Elvis, as I often am, and his wife said, "Oh, I loved Elvis," and George suddenly said, "Elvis didn't write anything in his life." And I said, "Yeah, but a beautiful voice, he could do all that." He said, "John Lennon, now he's a real genius." So he did use the word genius about John Lennon too. And I would then question that too, being a bit more sparing in my use of the word genius. So he did. He thought he was brilliant. He was clever with words, but that was John. He was just very clever with words.
Is there anyone you've come into contact with that you would consider a true genius? Or maybe even that you didn't come into contact with, but maybe in our lifetime?
I'm trying to think who I consider a genius. I mean, you know, you think maybe Mozart was, maybe Shakespeare was. I mean, you used to think of these people.
Okay.
Certainly Shakespeare must have been to turn out that body of work in such a short time. Incredible. But, you know, I kind of think geniuses are these people who discover cures for cancer and things and do these extraordinary things. And you think, how can they ever have so much knowledge? All the people that fly to that thing the other day, the guys, they hit a comet and came back and gave us some dirt from the comet. And you think, how could you ever do that? You know, maybe John and Paul are genius. I don't know. Well, I mean, maybe you're a genius. You're just not trying to show it. I tell you, I'm certainly not a genius.
One more thing I wanted to ask you about. We had touched on a little bit before when you were talking about the Paul McCartney press statement when he was releasing that first album where he never explicitly says, "No, I'm quitting the Beatles."
No.
But it was Don Short that reported it that way. Do you have any insight into why? Because later on he would claim he called Apple and people were telling him that, you know, off the record, that Paul had quit the band. And Paul had said, "No, I didn't," which is what he told you 2 weeks later.
Yeah. I don't know. We were all saying, you know, people were saying to me that it's all over. But Paul never, ever said it. I mean, he just didn't. I mean, but that's Paul, you know, you'd be very careful with the words. It wasn't a press conference. It was actually a document. And you got Peter Brown, who worked for them, to ask the questions. And then Paul gave the answers. And then it was typed out. And Paul would have read the words. And Paul would have been, I'm certain of this, thinking, well, you never know. You know, I'm not going to say this because I just don't know what's going to happen. And he didn't know what's going to happen. I know that he'd been waiting all those months for John to change his mind. Because Paul was the really one who was the real Beatle fan. He was a real Beatle fan. I mean, like nobody. At the same time, he could be difficult, I'm sure. I saw them working with George Harrison once, and George was recording something and putting on the final album. And in the end, I love you, that one. And isn't there a guitar break straight after that? I think there is.
Yeah, right toward the end.
And then George comes in, and he wasn't hitting it right. And he kept doing it, and Paul's like, no, let's do it again. I could see George getting more and more fed up, you know. And I can understand that Paul was hard to work with by this time because he knew how good he was.
Right.
And he knew how important he was. But I still think Paul was always hoping that John would change his mind because together they were better. And they must know this. They were better together than they were apart. Now and again, they could do a fantastic song apart, but they weren't as good. John, I think, probably realized that it wouldn't go on forever. And in a way, was getting out at the top. And he probably, whether he realized that or not, but intuitively, he'd have probably picked that up and thought, you know, this can't go on like this. And I've got this new interest. It's a new craze, which is called Yoko Ono. She's a craze, like all his other crazes. And Paul is thinking, Paul, being the Beatle fan, thinking, well, we can do a lot more. We haven't done all these things yet. I felt very sorry for Paul. I still do, because I think he got divorced. It's like they had a marriage and the husband leaves the wife. Well, Paul was the wife in those days. He was the hard worker. He was the one that kept everything going. He was always Ringo said, oh, he's off again. What's another album? What's more work, But I don't think that Paul really meant to say that. But Don Short said it for him. And then he couldn't get out of it. And when he rang me, he was saying, I never said that. I didn't mean that. We had lunch together, him and Linda and me in Soho. And he was adamant. I didn't say that,
It was a nice line he had. The Beatles left the Beatles, but nobody wants to be the one to say the party's over.
Yeah, it's a great line. Yeah, it's a great line. But I think until that moment, he was always hoping. And at the end, I'm sure that if John had shown willing at all, he'd have happily written with him again. Because they knew how good they were, and they knew they were better together.
Absolutely.
And it must be murder to think that, how imagine how it must have been for John to think, was I crazy? Eventually, was I mad to believe this? Imagine was a good album, not as good as the one before it, the first one, yeah. But after that, they weren't that great, They really weren't that great.
So do you think he had that realization?
Well, I would. Wouldn't you? I mean, we would,
Oh, sure.
I'm sure we would. At some point, he must have thought, Paul said, why don't you come down to New Orleans? We'll write together. And he never went. Maybe he should have gone. All these sort of things. And I just sort of think that there must have been times lying in bed in his room by himself with his guitar over his head. We had it all, I walked away from it. Now, he walked away, and maybe in a way that was the best thing, in that by walking away, you don't end up like the Rolling Stones, who are still going out, playing songs they wrote 40 years ago. Paul actually is, but living on being like the Empire State Building, something that people want to go and see. And that happened to Elvis. And Paul McCartney is probably a bit like that now. He tries not to be, because he's never stopped work, but, So I think John would have, maybe he got it right in that respect, but he robbed you and me and a lot of other people of some great songs.
So we'll end this with, you obviously have spent a lifetime and a career steeped in some amazing music from some amazing people. Mm-hmm. What would be on the short list of Ray Connolly playlist of greatest music ever?
The playlists, the things I'd like to hear. Let's say you do a thing here called Desert Island Discs, yeah? Mm-hmm. Which is a radio thing, been going like 50 years, and you choose 8 records. And I'd have on it, I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places. That would be lots of versions, like the Pat Boone one. A Good Thing. Do you remember the Fine Young Cannibals?
Oh, yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. Uh-huh. That's a great record. And Everything I Own by Bread, David Gates song. It's a very clever song.
Yeah, you talk about that in the book.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Forget. I change the list all the time, It's like you. We always think, oh, that one too. I always like that whole thing about how I go with a plastic spoon in my mouth. What a great line.
Oh, Substitute, yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonderful line, What else?
Joni, would it be Both Sides Now?
Joni, Both Sides Now. There's another one that she wrote that's also fantastic about...
Circle Game?
About the one where she's a portrait painter and she paints him and he's moved out west for the weather. And he's now got a new girlfriend. And she just says, I saw in the magazine, I see her name is Josephine. So he's got somebody else. She's a very clever writer. And she was nice to talk to. I just wish she'd been better, Mm-hmm. Joni be that.
How about Elvis?
Elvis, there was that great one on his Hand in Mine, the religious album, Milky White Way. But I mean, the Elvis one, they've got a different thing. I mean, I like Girl of My Best Friend. It's a great teenage song. It wasn't a hit in the States. I think Ralph Donner did it in the States.
Yeah, that's the one we know.
It was a big hit here in England. It's on his first post-war album, that one. But also all the Sun things. Mystery Train, probably more than any of them. A couple of flip sides, you think, God, he was pretty good. But the voice in the early 60s was probably at its best. And he had a very good control over his falsetto. Anything That's Part of You, which was on the flip side of Good Luck Charm. And it's a beautiful song. John Robertson wrote it, and it's a beautiful song. And you think, And I always think that maybe about his mother, actually, who died. He kept all her belongings. and nothing was thrown away. All her clothes were still the way she'd been when he was in the army. They'd been stored at Graceland. And the song is, I kept a ribbon from your hair, breath of perfume lingers there. And it's that sort of thing, anything that's part of you. He was good at that. Why Do Fools Fall in Love was a great record. Frankie Lyman's Teenagers, great record, It's that energy, If you'd asked me earlier, I'd have made a list, but I'd have been here all day then.
Uh-huh. How about Badfinger? Anything by them?
If you want it, here it is. Come and get it.
Okay.
Paul McCartney song. Good song.
Right. Anything by the Stones come to mind, or were you not much of a fan?
The Last Time, actually, was a better song than any of them. Okay. It's a great guitar riff. It's just great. And Mick's not got a great voice, but he's a great mimic. He's very good at actually mimicking sounds. And it's a duet between the guitar riff. That's really clever. It's the early ones that are best, but I think the Last Time Satisfaction are the ones. Brown Sugar. You go to a wedding, they play Brown Sugar, and everybody will get up and be dancing. Yeah, everybody. I went to a wedding recently, and I couldn't work out what the tunes were, and it's not the same. I thought, why don't you just play Brown Sugar? We'd all get up.
How about Buddy Holly?
Buddy Holly. I like things like Think It Over. Think It Over is great. There were so many. He didn't write It Doesn't Happen Anymore, but I think, didn't Paul Anka write that?
Yep.
That's a bloody good song.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, things like that, Buddy Holly, Words of Love, There were just so many. The nice thing was that there seemed to be, because I was 15, 16, 17, 18, there were so many great songs, and you just couldn't get enough of them.
Right.
I kind of wonder whether there's so many great songs today. I just don't know. I don't hear them. I watch television. I think, well, that's all right. I can work that one out, But I don't fall in love with them. But I don't fall in love anymore,
Mm-hmm.
You know how when you're 17, you're permanently in the state of love with somebody or something or whatever.
Right.
And everything's better and exciting. It doesn't last forever.
No, but that stays with you forever.
Yeah. There's a book to be written about those teenage years and how they stay with You Don't Own Me, Leslie Gore. It's a great song.
Yeah.
And that was way before feminism even existed. But she's saying, you don't own me.
Right.
I'm not just one of your little toys. You don't own me, So often some of these songs are way ahead of their time. Well, I always think, I'll be seeing you was a catchphrase. So long, I'll be seeing you. Yeah, I go on. Actually, in the song, which was written before the war, it's really, look at the moon and I'll be seeing you. It's about loss and death, possibly death, but certainly loss of someone who's gone away. But actually, when it's first written, it was actually not about that. It was a casual phrase. And the song turned it into a song of loss, which is what you can do with a song, take a casual phrase and make something of it, I think. I'll Be Seeing was actually written before the war.
Right.
In the war, it actually meant an awful lot. This was poignant, but of the moment, absolutely. And I always thought my father would have played that, would have listened to that. Certainly, it would have played it too. But in that club in Asbury Park, New Jersey, with a guy.
Sure.
The guy who told me, he said, there's a black guy playing the piano. That makes sense. And he went through all these songs. Your dad would get up there and go through all the things and say, play that one, not that one, And I kind of like that image, like me going through all my records and say, well, put that one on, yeah. And there's that other one, September Song.
Oh, yes.
I think that's Jacques Brel. And I worked with Morty Stuman, who wrote the music for Teenager in Love and all those things. Say the last time for me.
With Doc Pomus?
With Doc, yeah. And we worked together. We were going to do a musical together, and we didn't get it off. It was a musical set in the street in New York during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And anyway, we never got it off, but we're going to use all his songs. And the Jacques Brel songs, he wanted to use the Doc Pomus ones. We never got it off. He was a great guy. He died very young.
Mort Schumann?
Mort Schumann, yeah. Like 54. A lovely guy.
Save the Last Dance is a wonderful song.
Great song, though, isn't it? And apparently, Doc was in a wheelchair.
Right.
And he had a wife or a girlfriend. And he said, well, see the last time's for me, And then he'd go home in a wheelchair with a girl, But it's a great song, you see.
I get chills when I think about it.
Apparently, this magic moment got more plays. I like talking to musicians about their songs and sort of where they came from, what they do,
Mm-hmm. They write Can't Get Used to Losing You?
He wrote that, yeah.
Yeah, that's what
That's a great song. And I said, was that written for Elvis? He said, no, we just wrote it. And Andy
Williams.
Yeah, and they did that. And he said, and I got really pissed off because it was on the flip side of, was it Moon River or something? And he got really upset because he just sort of said, Henry Mancini's Moon River, and he sang that. And then he said, oh, and here's the flip side, as though it wasn't that important.
Right.
Fantastic song.
Yeah. Well, it was a big hit here.
And the plucking of the
violins, right?
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah. I loved it.
This has been fantastic. Thank you for making the time. I really want people to check out your book because it's a fantastic story. It just connects so many dots of these artists and this music and this story, this time we still revere. I'm so glad to have read it. Thank you for bringing it to my attention.
Well, I just hope some people enjoy it and like it. And
sure,
it came to me when I had COVID and I was in intensive care for 102 days. Not expected to survive, but I did. And then my former secretary said, "You've got to write it." I said, "I'm not sure. No one's going to want it." But, I'm glad I did now. And and I'm glad you liked it. Thank you.
Something About the Beatles. Created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez. Executive producer Rick Way. Title song by the Corgis.